My son told me it was too risky to spend money like that. This was when I wanted to use $30,000 of my savings to fix the roof of my house, which was literally caving in. $30,000 that I had gathered by cleaning other people's houses for years, with my cracked hands and my destroyed knees. $30,000 that were mine, earned with my sweat, with my effort, with my blood. But according to Ryan, my only son, spending it to fix my own home was an unnecessary risk. Months later, I discovered that he had borrowed $200,000 in my name, without consulting me, without asking for permission, without even warning me, to buy the dream house for Vanessa, his wife. A massive house with a garden, a 3-car garage, and luxury finishes. A house that I could never afford. A house that was now generating a debt that threatened to take away everything I had. And when that debt began to drown them, when the banks started calling, when the debt collectors appeared, they came to my door demanding that I sell my house, my only asset, to save them from the consequences of their own decisions. They wanted me to be left with nothing so that they could maintain their life of luxury. They wanted me to sacrifice the only thing I had left to pay for their mistakes. And I, Margaret Sullivan, a 62-year-old woman who had spent her entire life saying yes, who had spent decades making herself small and invisible so that others could shine, finally said something different. I finally said the word that I had never dared to pronounce. I told them no. But before getting to that moment, before that definitive break that changed everything, I need to tell you how I got here. I need you to understand that this didn't start a few months ago when I discovered the debt. This began decades ago, when I was still young, when I still believed that family love was unconditional, when I still thought that if I sacrificed enough, if I made myself small enough, someone would finally see me. I grew up in a family where there were always marked differences. My older brother was the pride of my parents, the brilliant son, the one studying engineering, the one who was going to be someone important in life. I was simply the daughter, the one who had to learn to cook well, to keep the house spotless, to take care of others without expecting anything in return. My dreams didn't matter because, as my parents said, I was going to get married young anyway, and my future husband would take charge of supporting me. So, I learned from a very young age that my desires came in last place. I learned that asking for something for myself was being selfish, capricious, ungrateful. I learned to make myself invisible, not to bother anyone, to settle for the scraps of attention and affection that remained after my brother received everything good. When my parents paid for my brother's entire college tuition, they didn't even ask me if I wanted to study. They simply assumed it wasn't necessary. I got married at 22 to a man who turned out to be exactly what my family expected. Someone who saw me as a domestic employee with marital benefits rather than a life partner. I had Ryan when I was 23, and from the first moment I held him in my arms, my life ceased to belong to me. Everything revolved around him, his needs, his education, his promising future. My husband worked a blue-collar job at a factory, yes, but the money barely reached the basics. I started cleaning other people's houses to be able to pay for Ryan's private math tutors, new school clothes every year, field trips with his classmates, and books that weren't on the official list, but that his teachers said were important. I remember perfectly the nights when I arrived home, with my hands cracked from scrubbing so many strange floors, with my back aching from carrying buckets of water, and the only thing that kept me standing was thinking that I was building a better future for my son. I thought that he would see my sacrifice someday. I thought he would understand everything I did for him, all the times I skipped meals so that he could eat better, all the times I wore the same worn-out clothes for years to be able to buy him brand-name sneakers. I thought that when he grew up, when he became a man, he would be different from my father, different from my husband, different from all the men in my family who only knew how to take and never give. When Ryan was 17, my husband died in a traffic accident. A truck ran a red light and hit him head-on when he was coming back from work. It was devastating, painful, terrifying, but it was also liberating in a way that I never dared to confess to anyone, not even to myself for a long time. Suddenly, I was the only one responsible for everything. There was no one else to tell me what to do, how to think, what to feel, how to spend every penny. It was just Ryan and me against the world, and I was determined that he would have everything I never had. I worked double what I had worked before. I took 2 cleaning jobs, sometimes 3, when there was an opportunity. My knees began to hurt constantly. My back creaked every morning when getting up. My hands looked like those of a woman 20 years older, but I didn't stop for a single day. Ryan was going to finish college. Ryan was going to have the life that I never had. Ryan was going to be my pride, my reward for so many years of silent sacrifice. And he did it. He graduated with honors, with a degree in civil engineering, got a good job at a major construction firm, and began to earn a salary that I had never dreamed of having. I was so proud of him, so happy to see him succeed, to see him wear elegant suits, to see him speak with confidence about projects and contracts. I thought that finally, it had all been worth it. I thought that now, maybe, he could help me a little bit. Maybe he could pay me back even a small fraction of everything I had done for him for so many years. Maybe now that he was earning well, I could finally rest a little, work fewer hours, take care of my health, which was already deteriorating. But it wasn't like that. Ryan met Vanessa when he was 25 and had already been working at the construction firm for 2 years. She was an executive assistant at the same company, coming from a wealthy family from the north side of the city. She always wore expensive clothes and spoke with that tone of superiority that people who have never had to worry about money have. She was beautiful. I can't deny that. She had that type of polished beauty that comes from expensive facials and high-end salons. When Ryan introduced me to her for the first time, I tried to be nice, to show I was happy for him. I prepared a special dinner at my house, cleaned everything until it shone, and cooked his favorite dishes from childhood. Vanessa arrived in high heels that resonated against my old floor, looked around my house with an expression she couldn't quite hide, that mixture of pity and contempt that hurts more than any direct insult. During dinner, she barely tasted the food. She said it was delicious, but that she was watching her figure, that she had to maintain certain standards. Ryan laughed and agreed with her, as if suddenly all the food I had cooked for him for years wasn't good enough anymore. As if now that he had Vanessa, my homemade stews were something to be ashamed of. I quickly realized that Vanessa didn't see me as her boyfriend's mother. She saw me as someone convenient, like free help she could use when it was useful to her. The first few months were subtle. She asked me to take care of her dog when they went away for the weekend. She called me to teach her how to cook certain dishes because Ryan missed them, always with that sweet and fake tone she used when she needed something from me, and Ryan never said anything. He never defended me. He never established clear boundaries with her. I was his mother, the woman who had sacrificed everything for him. But now Vanessa was his absolute priority, and I had been relegated to a secondary role in his life, a role of servitude more than family. They got married a year later in an expensive ceremony in an elegant banquet hall. The wedding cost more than $50,000. Vanessa's parents paid for most of it, but Ryan came to ask me for help with certain expenses. He needed $8,000 to complete the payment for the reception and the honeymoon in Cancun. $8,000 that I didn't have easily available, but which I took out of my savings because he was my son, because it was his special day, because I still believed that he would thank me someday. He was earning almost 4 times more than me at that moment. Vanessa also had a good salary. Between the two of them, they could have paid for that wedding without problems. But it was easier to ask me, because I never said no, because I always found a way to give him what he needed, even if it meant leaving myself with nothing. At the wedding, Vanessa barely included me in the important photographs. I was there, yes, but always in the background, always apart from the central moments. Her mother occupied the place of honor in all the family shots, while they placed me to the side along with distant aunts and casual friends. Ryan said nothing. He didn't look for me to make sure I was okay, that I felt included. He was too busy attending to Vanessa and her family. After the wedding, they bought a condo in an exclusive area of the city. It was a beautiful place with 2 bedrooms, a balcony, hardwood floors, and a modern kitchen with stainless steel appliances. It cost $300,000. Vanessa's parents gave them $100,000 for the down payment. Ryan took out a mortgage for the rest. Meanwhile, I continued living in the same house where Ryan had grown up, a small 2-bedroom house in a neighborhood that was no longer as safe as before. The roof had leaks that got worse every rainy season. I had to put buckets all over the living room and the hallway every time water fell from the sky. The walls had moisture stains that grew like dark fungi. The electrical wiring was so old that sometimes the lights flickered without reason, and I lived with the constant fear that a fire would start. But I didn't complain to Ryan. I didn't ask him for help, because that's how I had been taught all my life, to endure, to be strong, to not be a burden to anyone. I kept working cleaning houses, although every time it cost me more physical effort. My knees no longer responded as before. Climbing stairs had become a painful challenge. My hands trembled sometimes from the arthritis that was beginning to develop. Ryan and Vanessa came to visit me occasionally, maybe once a month. Vanessa's discomfort in my humble home was always evident. She sat on the edge of the old sofa as if she were afraid of getting dirty. She looked at the ceiling with the water stains and made passive-aggressive comments about how dangerous it was to live in those conditions, but never offered real help to change the situation. The visits always ended the same way. Vanessa said they had to leave because they had plans. Important commitments. Ryan gave me a quick kiss on the cheek and they left in their new car that they had bought that same year. An imported vehicle that cost $45,000. When they went to pick up Vanessa after work, she complained if she had to wait 5 extra minutes, but they could spend that huge amount of money on a car without thinking twice. When Vanessa got pregnant, everything got worse. Suddenly I was useful again. They called me constantly to go to their condo to help. They needed me to clean, to cook, to prepare the baby's room. I went every time they called, putting aside my own cleaning jobs, losing income that I desperately needed, because it was my first grandchild and I wanted to be present. But it was never enough. Vanessa always found something to criticize. The food was too spicy or too simple. I hadn't folded the baby's clothes correctly. The room wasn't organized according to the system she had seen on the internet. And Ryan nodded at everything she said, validating every criticism, every derogatory comment toward me. When the baby was born, a beautiful boy they named Leo, I was excited to be a grandmother. I thought this would be a new beginning, an opportunity to rebuild my relationship with Ryan, to feel like an important part of his family. But I quickly became the free babysitter. They called me at any hour to take care of the baby because they wanted to go out to dinner, go to the movies, take weekend vacations. I said yes every time. I canceled my own jobs, my scarce personal activities, any plan I might have, because he was my grandson and I loved him with all my heart. But I never received a genuine thank you. They never even offered me compensation for the money I lost by not being able to work those days. It was simply my obligation, as a grandmother, as a mother, as the person who existed to serve others. While I took care of Leo in my deteriorating house, with leaks and humidity, they posted photos on social media of their dinners at expensive restaurants, their romantic getaways to the beach, their shopping trips in exclusive stores. Vanessa constantly showed off her new designer bag that cost $3,000, her Italian shoes, her monthly beauty treatments, money that flowed freely for them, but never reached me, not even when I clearly needed it. Years passed, and I kept working, although my body protested more and more. I was 60 years old when I finally had to accept that I could no longer keep cleaning 3 houses a day as I had done for decades. My knees betrayed me on the stairs. My back complained every time I bent down to clean floors. My hands shook so much in the mornings that sometimes I couldn't even open a jar. I reduced my workload to only 2 houses per week, the ones that paid me better and treated me with more respect. That meant less money, obviously, but I had no alternative. My body simply couldn't give anymore. I started living even more austerely than I already lived. I bought only the essentials at the market. I reused everything I could. I turned off lights obsessively to save electricity. Every dollar counted. But there was something that worried me more than anything else: the roof of my house. It wasn't just occasional leaks anymore. There were entire sections where the concrete was crumbling. I could see the sky through the cracks in some parts. During heavy storms, water fell like waterfalls inside my living room. There was mold growing on the walls. The smell of humidity was so intense it permeated all my clothes. One day, a neighbor who worked in construction came over and told me something that froze my blood. He explained that the roof wasn't just in bad shape, but it was dangerous, that there was a real risk of collapse, especially if a strong storm came, like the ones that were becoming more frequent, that I shouldn't be sleeping there, that it was a miracle it hadn't already fallen on me while I slept. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stayed looking at the cracked ceiling, imagining what would happen if it collapsed while I was in bed. Imagining dying crushed in my own house, alone, because I didn't have the money to fix it in time. I got up trembling, And that same week, I started looking for quotes to repair the roof. The figures the contractors gave me were terrifying. The cheapest one asked for $25,000. The most expensive, $40,000. Everyone agreed that it was an urgent job, that it couldn't be postponed anymore, that every day that passed the risk increased. They explained to me with technical details that I barely understood about structures, beams, waterproofing, but the message was clear. Either I fixed the roof soon, or I would lose my house completely. I checked my savings with trembling hands. After years of pinching every penny, of denying myself any luxury, of living with the bare minimum, I had $32,000 saved. It was everything I had in the world. My only safety net. The money I had planned to use for my old age, for medical emergencies, so as not to be a burden to anyone when I could no longer work at all. But now I needed that money for something more immediate, to survive, to literally have a roof over my head that wouldn't kill me while I slept. I hired the contractor who seemed most reliable to me, one who charged exactly $30,000. He promised me that in 6 weeks my house would be safe again, that I could sleep peacefully knowing there was no risk of collapse. But before signing any contract, before handing over the money that represented decades of sacrifice, I decided I should consult it with Ryan. Not because I needed his permission, but because I thought maybe he would want to help me. Maybe he would see this as an opportunity to pay me back, even if it was a little bit of everything I had done for him. Maybe his values had changed now that he was a father himself and understood better what sacrifice meant. One Sunday afternoon, I invited them to my house. I made coffee and bought pastries, trying to create a comfortable atmosphere to talk. Vanessa arrived with Leo, who was already 3 years old and a precious boy. Ryan came in distracted looking at his phone, as always lately. It was hard for me to make him pay full attention to me. When I finally managed to get them to sit down and listen to me, I explained the roof situation. I showed them the cracks, the moisture stains, the sections where the concrete was literally falling to pieces. I told them what the neighbor contractor had warned me about the real danger of collapse. I showed them the quotes I had received from different contractors. Ryan barely looked up from his phone while I spoke. Vanessa looked around my house with that expression of disgust that was already familiar to me. When I finished explaining, there was an awkward silence that stretched on too long. Finally, Ryan sighed, as if I were asking him for something completely unreasonable. He told me that $30,000 was a lot of money. That at my age, making such a big investment in an old house didn't make financial sense. That maybe it would be better to consider other options, like moving to a smaller rental apartment, something more manageable for an elderly person alone. Vanessa nodded at everything he said, adding that besides, that part of the city wasn't safe anymore, that I should think about going somewhere quieter. I explained to them that this house was my only asset, that it was the place where Ryan had grown up, where all my memories were, where I had built my life, that it was completely paid off, that it was mine, and that moving would mean losing my only material good and starting to pay rent with my miserable pension that barely covered food. Ryan shrugged and told me something that stuck in my memory like fire. He told me that spending $30,000 to fix an old house was very risky at my age, that I should be more prudent with my money, that health issues in older people were expensive, and I would need those savings for medical emergencies, that doing that expensive repair wasn't sensible, it wasn't logical, it wasn't responsible, very risky. Those were his exact words. My son told me that spending my own money, earned with my own sweat, to keep my only home habitable was very risky. He told me this while wearing a watch that I knew cost more than $5,000. He told me this sitting on my old sofa while his wife was wearing designer clothes worth more than my income for a whole month. Vanessa added that, furthermore, if I spent all my savings on the roof, I wouldn't have anything left to help them with Leo. That they were considering putting him in a bilingual private school next year, and it would be nice if Grandma could contribute something to her grandson's education. She said it with that sweet and manipulative tone I knew so well, as if my grandson's future depended on me being left without a roof over my head. I remained silent, processing what I had just heard. My son, the man to whom I had dedicated my entire life, to whom I had given everything even when I had nothing, was telling me not to fix my house that was literally falling to pieces because he and his wife wanted me to save that money to give it to them later. They wanted me to live in dangerous conditions, risking my life so they could continue living comfortably. I tried to explain the urgency of the situation to them one more time. I told them it wasn't a remodel for whim or aesthetics, that it was literally a matter of safety, of survival, that the contractors had warned me the roof could collapse at any moment. Ryan interrupted me with impatience and told me that contractors always exaggerated to sell their services, that probably the problem wasn't as serious as they painted it. They left that afternoon without offering me a single dollar of help, without asking me if I needed anything, without showing genuine concern for my safety. I stayed alone in my house that afternoon, looking at the cracks in the ceiling that seemed to mock me. Ryan's words echoed in my head over and over again. Very risky. Spending my own money on my own survival was very risky, according to him. I sat on my old sofa, and for the first time in many years I cried. I cried out of frustration, out of helplessness, out of profound disappointment. But tears weren't going to fix my roof. Tears weren't going to protect me from dying crushed if the concrete collapsed on me. So I wiped my eyes, took a deep breath, and made a decision. I was going to do the repair anyway, with or without Ryan's approval, with or without his help. It was my house, my money, my life, and if no one else was going to take care of me, then I would. The next day I called the contractor and signed the contract. I gave him an advance of $15,000 to buy the materials. He promised to start the following week. I felt a relief mixed with terror seeing how my life savings went in a single payment, but it was necessary. It was that or wait for the roof to fall on me, literally. The workers arrived the following Monday early in the morning. They were 3 men led by the contractor, Mr. Henderson, a man of about 50 who seemed honest and hardworking. They began to demolish the most damaged sections of the roof. The noise was deafening. Dust filled the entire house. I had to cover my few pieces of furniture with old sheets to protect them. During the following weeks, my house became a construction zone. I got up every morning at 6 to prepare coffee and breakfast for the workers. They didn't ask me to, but I felt it was the right thing to do. They worked hard under the sun, sweating, straining to save my house. The least I could do was feed them decently. I liked Mr. Henderson. He treated me with respect, explained every step of the process, showed me the progress. I realized it was honest work, that he wasn't stealing a cent from me. When they found additional problems, things that hadn't been evident in the initial inspection, he told me in advance and gave me options. He never tried to take advantage of me for being an older woman alone. Ryan didn't come back to visit me during that whole month the construction lasted. I called him a couple of times to tell him how everything was going, thinking naively that maybe he would be happy to know I was taking action to be safe. But his answers were cold and distant. He told me he was very busy with work, that he would call me later, and then he never did. Vanessa sent me a message a week after the construction began. She didn't ask how I was or how the work was going. She asked me if I could go back to taking care of Leo on weekends because they wanted to go to a couple's spa. I explained that my house was under construction, full of dust and debris, that it wasn't safe to bring the child there. She didn't respond. She simply left me on read, as if I had committed some unforgivable offense by not being available to serve them. The work finished in 5 weeks, a week earlier than promised. Mr. Henderson and his team had done an excellent job. The new roof was solid, waterproof, safe. There were no more cracks or moisture stains. The walls looked clean after they painted them. For the first time in years, I could sleep peacefully knowing there was no risk of the roof collapsing on me in the middle of the night. The final cost was exactly $30,000, just as we had agreed. There were no surprises or additional charges. I handed Mr. Henderson the last $15,000 remaining from my savings. Seeing my bank account almost at zero, I felt a terrible vertigo. I had spent practically everything I had. I had barely $2,000 left as a financial cushion. But at least I had a safe roof over my head. Mr. Henderson gave me a firm handshake and told me it had been a pleasure working for me, that he wished all clients were as kind and respectful as I was. His words made me cry, although I tried to hide it. It was sad that a stranger treated me with more dignity and consideration than my own son. I called Ryan excitedly to tell him the work was finished, that my house was now safe, that it had turned out beautiful. I suggested he come see it, bring Leo, that we could celebrate with a meal. He told me maybe in a few weeks, that right now they were very busy. Vanessa had gotten a new position at her job that required more responsibilities, and they were adjusting to the new schedules. 2 months passed without them coming to visit me. 2 months in which I sat alone in my newly repaired house, looking at the new ceiling, feeling proud of having achieved it, but also deeply lonely. I had spent my life savings on that necessary repair, and not even my only son had bothered to come see the result. I kept working cleaning the 2 houses per week, trying to rebuild my savings little by little. But now all my income went to basic expenses. Food, electricity, water, gas. I had nothing extra left to save. I lived literally day to day, with the constant terror that any medical emergency or unexpected expense would sink me completely. One afternoon in November, Ryan finally came to visit me. He arrived alone, without Vanessa or Leo. He entered my house and didn't even comment on the new roof, on how good everything looked now. He simply sat at the kitchen table with a serious expression I couldn't decipher. There was something in his body language that made me nervous. He asked me directly how much money I had left from my savings. The question took me by surprise. I told him the truth, that I had spent practically everything on the roof repair, that I had barely $2,000 left for emergencies. I hoped maybe he would show concern, that he would offer to help me rebuild my savings, that he would recognize I had been left in a vulnerable position. Instead, his expression hardened. He told me it had been irresponsible to spend all my money that way, that he had warned me it was risky, that now if something happened to me, he would have to take care of me because I hadn't been prudent with my finances. He said it as if I were a burden, as if having saved my own life was an act of selfishness that harmed him. I couldn't hold back anymore. I asked him what alternative I had. If he preferred I had waited for the roof to collapse on me. If it would have been better for him if I had died crushed with my $30,000 intact in the bank for him to inherit. The words came out more bitter than I intended, but I was fed up with his lack of empathy. Ryan stood up abruptly, offended by my comment. He told me I was being dramatic, that I was exaggerating as always, that he was only trying to help me see things from a sensible financial perspective, that I wasn't a young woman anymore, and I had to start thinking about the future, about what would happen when I could no longer work at all. I replied that was precisely why I had done the repair, because I needed a safe place to live for that future he mentioned, because this house was the only thing I had and I couldn't afford the luxury of losing it, because unlike him, I didn't have anyone to back me financially if things went wrong. Ryan left my house that afternoon without even saying goodbye. I heard him start his car with more force than necessary, like an angry teenager. I stayed sitting in my kitchen, trembling, trying to process what had just happened. My son was upset with me not because I was in danger, but because I had spent money that he apparently already considered his. 3 weeks passed without hearing anything from him. He didn't call. He didn't answer my messages. Nothing. I tried not to think too much about it, to continue with my routine, to focus on my work and rebuilding my savings little by little, but the loneliness weighed more each day. It was painful to realize that my only son had cut off contact simply because I hadn't done what he wanted with my own money. Then, one December morning, I received a call from an unknown number. It was a woman who identified herself as a bank representative. She told me they needed to confirm certain information about a loan that had been requested in my name. A loan of $200,000. At first, I thought it was a phone scam, the kind that tries to get information out of elderly people. I told her there must be a mistake, that I hadn't requested any loan. She insisted that they had all my documentation, that the loan had already been approved and disbursed 3 months ago. 3 months. Just when I was starting the repair of my roof, I felt the floor opening under my feet. I asked her to give me more details. She explained that the loan had been requested for the purchase of a property, a house in an exclusive residential area north of the city, that my signature appeared on all the documents, that my credit information had been used, that I was legally responsible for that debt. I hung up the phone with my hands shaking so much I could barely hold it. This couldn't be happening. It must be a mistake, an administrative confusion, something. But deep in my heart, I already knew the truth. I already knew who had done this. Only one person had access to my personal documents, to my information, to everything necessary to forge my signature or convince me to sign something without me really knowing what it was. I called Ryan immediately. He didn't answer. I left him 3 increasingly desperate voicemails, asking him to call me urgently, that I needed to speak with him about something serious. Nothing, I called Vanessa. She didn't answer either. It was as if they had agreed to ignore me completely. I went to the bank in person that same afternoon. I explained to a loan officer what was happening. He pulled the file and showed me the documents. There was my name, my signature, copies of my ID, proof of address. Everything looked legitimate on paper. They showed me the address of the property that I had supposedly bought with that loan. I asked him to give me the exact address. I wrote it down with a trembling hand. When I left the bank, I took a taxi directly to that address, even though the trip would cost me almost all the money I carried in my wallet. I needed to see with my own eyes what this was. The taxi dropped me off in front of a beautiful house in a gated community with security. It was a modern 2-story construction with a large garden, a 3-car garage, large windows, the type of house anyone would dream of. The type of house I could never afford in 1,000 lifetimes. And there, parked in the driveway, was Ryan's car. I rang the doorbell with my heart beating so fast I thought it would burst out of my chest. Vanessa opened the door. Her expression when she saw me was of total surprise, followed immediately by annoyance. She asked me what I was doing there, how I had gotten the address. I told her I needed to speak with Ryan immediately. She tried to close the door in my face, but I pushed and entered. I wasn't going to let myself be stopped. Ryan appeared from the living room, looking uncomfortable, guilty. I asked him directly if he had taken out a loan in my name, if he had bought this house using my credit, my information, my signature. There was a long, awkward silence. Vanessa was the one who finally spoke. She told me with that condescending tone I hated so much that I didn't understand how family finances worked. That they had needed a co-signer to qualify for the loan for this house because they were still paying for the previous condo. That I, with my paid-off house and clean credit history, was the perfect option. I shouted at her that no one had asked my permission, that I hadn't authorized any of this, that I didn't even know this house existed until a few hours ago. Ryan finally spoke, with a low and evasive voice. He told me they had planned to tell me later, once everything was established, that they knew I would worry unnecessarily if they brought it up before, that I would worry unnecessarily, as if forging my signature and indebting me for $200,000 was something trivial, as if mortgaging my future without my consent was a minor detail. I asked him how they had gotten my signature on those documents. Ryan looked away, unable to hold my gaze. Vanessa intervened again. She explained coldly that I should remember that Sunday afternoon, months ago, when they had come to visit me, when I had showed them the roof quotes and told them about my plans. Ryan had asked me to sign some documents, telling me they were to update my will, to ensure Leo was protected if something happened to me, that it was important to do it now, that I was going to spend all my savings. I remembered that moment. I remembered signing those papers without really reading them, trusting blindly in my son, trusting that he would never hurt me, that he would always look out for my interests. How stupid I had been. How naive. How blind to the reality of who my son really was. I asked him how they dared. How could they do something like this to me after everything I had sacrificed for him his entire life? Ryan finally exploded. He shouted at me that he had never asked me to sacrifice anything for him, that those had been my decisions, not his, that if I had chosen to live a miserable life cleaning other people's houses, that had been my choice, not his fault. Vanessa added that, furthermore, I should be happy to be able to help them, that this house was an excellent investment that would appreciate over time, that technically the loan was in my name, but they were paying the monthly installments, so I didn't have to worry, that I was making unnecessary drama over something that, in the end, benefited me too because it was for my grandson. I asked them how much the monthly payment for that loan was. Ryan mumbled that it was $3,200 a month. $3,200. That amount was more than what I earned in 2 full months of work. If they stopped paying for any reason, I would be legally responsible for that debt. They could take away my house, the one I had just repaired with all my savings. They could leave me on the street. I shouted this at Ryan, trying to make him understand the magnitude of what he had done. He told me I was exaggerating, that they had good jobs and good incomes, that they weren't going to stop paying, that I should trust him. Trust him. After what I had just discovered, after this monumental betrayal, he was asking me to trust him. I left that house crying, trembling with rage and helplessness. I walked several blocks aimlessly before realizing I didn't have enough money for another taxi back. I had to take 2 buses, a trip of almost 2 hours, sitting among strangers while tears kept falling uncontrollably. People looked at me with pity or discomfort, but I didn't care about keeping up appearances anymore. When I got home, it was night. I sat in my living room, under my new roof that had cost me everything, and felt that it had all been useless. I had saved my house from physically collapsing, only to discover that my son had put it at risk anyway. If Ryan and Vanessa stopped paying that loan, the banks would come for my property. Everything I had built, everything I had left, could disappear because of decisions I never made. That night I didn't sleep. I stayed sitting in the dark, thinking about all the signs I had ignored for years. All the times Ryan had shown that I wasn't important to him. All the occasions when he had chosen Vanessa, her comfort, her desires over my well-being. How he had allowed her to treat me like a servant. How he had never defended me, never valued me, never really thanked me. The following days were a nightmare. I tried to seek legal help, to consult with lawyers about what I could do. But everyone told me the same thing. My signature was on the documents, my information had been used with my real ID. Technically, I had authorized the loan. Proving fraud would be almost impossible, especially against my own son. And even if I succeeded, the process would be long, costly, emotionally devastating. A lawyer suggested I talk to Ryan, that I try to reach a family agreement so he would officially assume the debt or remove me as a co-signer. I tried calling him for a whole week. He never answered my calls. I sent him messages explaining that we needed to resolve this legally, that I needed formal protection that he would continue paying. He never responded. Finally, after 2 weeks, he appeared at my house one afternoon. He wore an expression of annoyance, as if I were a nuisance he had to attend to. I told him we needed to go to the bank together, that I needed him to sign documents assuming full responsibility for the loan, releasing me from any obligation. He laughed. He literally laughed in my face. He told me that was impossible, that the bank would never approve removing me from the loan because my credit was what had made it possible for them to give them so much money, that without me as a guarantor, they didn't qualify to keep that house, that I would simply have to accept the situation and stop creating problems. I asked him what would happen if they stopped paying, if they lost their jobs, if they had an emergency, if they simply decided they didn't want to keep paying anymore. Ryan assured me that wasn't going to happen, that he earned well, that Vanessa also had a good income, that he could perfectly handle the $3,200 a month without a problem. But I didn't believe him anymore. I didn't trust any word that came out of his mouth anymore. I begged him to at least let me have something in writing, a private document between us where he legally committed to paying. He refused. He told me I was being ridiculous, distrustful, ungrateful, that after everything he had achieved in life, I still treated him as if he were irresponsible. I stood looking at him, really looking at him, perhaps for the first time in years, and I saw a stranger. I saw a selfish, manipulative man, capable of destroying his own mother for his convenience. I saw everything I hadn't wanted to see for decades, because it was easier to live in the illusion that my son loved me. The following months I lived in a constant state of anxiety. Every time my phone rang, my heart stopped thinking it would be the bank notifying me that Ryan had stopped paying. Every night, I checked my email compulsively looking for late payment notifications. I called the bank every week to confirm that the monthly payments were being covered. I kept working cleaning houses, but now the stress affected my health in new ways. I developed high blood pressure. Constant headaches began. I lost weight because anxiety took away my appetite. My hands shook even more than before. I barely slept 3 or 4 hours a night, waking up startled from nightmares where I lost my house. Ryan and Vanessa didn't contact me again. It was as if, after getting what they wanted, I no longer had any purpose in their lives. They didn't even call me to take care of Leo. I suppose they didn't need my help anymore now that they lived in their new house and could pay professional nannies with the money they had left over after making the payments on the debt that was in my name. A whole year passed this way. A year living on the edge, working despite my deteriorated health, surviving with the minimum to be able to save some money just in case. Just in case Ryan stopped paying and I had to start covering those impossible monthly payments. Just in case I lost my house and needed money to rent something. just in case everything collapsed, as I knew deep down would eventually happen. And then it happened. One afternoon in March, I received a letter from the bank. The loan was 2 months behind, 2 months without paying, $6,400 of debt plus late interest. And as a co-signer, I was legally responsible for covering them immediately or facing legal action. I called Ryan at that very moment. "Thank God," he answered. I screamed at him, asking what was happening, why he had stopped paying. He told me with a tired voice that they had had some unforeseen expenses, that Vanessa had left her job because the work environment was toxic and it was affecting her mental health, that just his salary wasn't enough to cover all their debts, that they needed a little time to adjust. I asked him why he hadn't warned me before, why he had waited until the bank notified me. He told me he didn't want to worry me, that he thought he could resolve the situation before I found out. Lies. It was all lies. He hadn't thought about me for a second. He had simply stopped paying, knowing perfectly well that I would bear the consequences. I explained to him with my voice breaking that I didn't have $6,400 that I had been saving all year, but I barely had $4,000 in my account, that if I paid this, I would be left with nothing again, that I couldn't keep rescuing him from his mistakes. He got upset and told me that technically the debt was in my name, so it was my responsibility too, that if I didn't pay, both of us would suffer the consequences. I hung up the phone and sat in my kitchen, looking at that bank letter as if it were a death sentence. $6,400. I had $4,000 saved after a whole year of extreme sacrifices. If I paid that, I would be in the red. And the worst of all was knowing that this wouldn't end here. If Vanessa didn't go back to work, if Ryan didn't find a way to increase his income, this would repeat month after month until it destroyed me completely. That night I made a difficult decision. I wasn't going to pay. I couldn't keep sacrificing myself for someone who clearly didn't care about destroying me. But I couldn't simply sit back with my arms crossed, waiting for them to take my house. I needed to protect myself somehow, although I didn't know exactly how. The next morning, I went to see another lawyer, one I had been recommended who was more aggressive in these types of cases. I explained the whole situation from the beginning. How Ryan had used my signature deceiving me, how he had taken the loan without my real knowledge, how now he was stopping payments, putting me at risk. The lawyer listened to me attentively and then gave me news I didn't want to hear. He told me that legally, even if I proved I had been deceived, the process to annul the loan would take years. Years I didn't have. Meanwhile, the bank would continue demanding payments and would eventually execute the collateral, which was my house. My only real option was to pay the overdue monthly payments to stop the immediate foreclosure process and then try to negotiate something with Ryan or the bank. I told him I didn't have enough money to pay everything overdue. The lawyer suggested I sell something, get a personal loan, look for any way to get that money quickly because every day that passed the late interest kept growing. It was an impossible situation. I had nothing to sell except my house, and that was precisely what I was trying to save. I returned home defeated. I sat on my sofa, and for the first time in my life, I seriously considered giving up. Let them take the house, move to a rented room in some cheap place, live my last years in absolute poverty. Maybe that was what I deserved for having been so foolish, so blind, so willing to believe in someone who had never valued me. But then I looked around my living room. I saw the ceiling I had saved with all my savings. I saw the walls I had painted myself. I saw every corner of this house that represented decades of my life, of my effort, of my existence. And something inside me hardened. I wasn't going to give up. I wasn't going to let Ryan take the only thing I had left without a fight. I did something I had never done before. I went to my 2 employers, the ladies for whom I cleaned, and explained my situation with complete honesty. I told them my son had taken a loan in my name without my real consent, that he was now behind on payments, that I needed to get money urgently or I would lose my house. I asked them if they could pay me in advance for 2 months of work, or if they knew anyone else who needed cleaning services. Both ladies were incredibly compassionate. One of them, Mrs. Thompson, offered to lend me $3,000 interest-free. She told me I had worked for her for almost 15 years with honesty and dedication, that she trusted I would return the money when I could. The other, Mrs. Davis, got me 2 additional houses to clean, extra jobs I could do on weekends. I cried in front of them. I cried because two ladies who were technically just my employers showed me more compassion and humanity than my own son. They offered me coffee, hugged me, told me everything would be resolved. That day, I understood something fundamental. Family isn't always blood. Sometimes family are the people who choose to be there for you when you need it most. With the $3,000 from Mrs. Thompson's loan and my $4,000 saved, I managed to gather the $7,000 I needed to cover the 2 overdue monthly payments, plus part of the late interest. I went to the bank and made the payment, feeling how every dollar I handed over was a piece of my soul. I was left with $0 in my bank account. $0. After a whole life of work, I called Ryan to inform him that I had covered his debt. I expected at least a thank you, an acknowledgement of the magnitude of what I had just done. Instead, he told me coldly that he knew I would solve it. That's why he hadn't worried too much, that I always found a way to fix things. I told him this couldn't happen again, that if he fell behind on payments again, I wouldn't have any way to cover it, that I had had to borrow money, that I was in a desperate financial situation because of him. Ryan sighed with impatience and told me to stop being dramatic, that he was going to resume payments next month, that Vanessa was looking for a new job, that everything was going to stabilize, but it didn't stabilize. The next month, Ryan made the full payment. The month after, he only paid half. The third month, he didn't pay anything. Every time I called him to complain, he had a different excuse, that Leo had had medical expenses, that the car had broken down, that they had had to do urgent repairs on the house. Always something. Always a reason why his financial responsibilities couldn't be covered. I kept working like crazy. The 2 original houses plus the 2 new ones Mrs. Davis had gotten me. 4 houses a week, including weekends. My body screamed in pain every night. My knees were destroyed. My back had become a constant torment. But I couldn't stop. I had to pay back the $3,000 to Mrs. Thompson. I had to be prepared for when Ryan failed on payments again. I spent 6 months in that hell, working to exhaustion, living with the bare minimum. Every penny I earned went straight to paying debts or trying to rebuild an emergency cushion. I lost 20 pounds. New gray hairs appeared. I developed chronic insomnia. I looked in the mirror and almost didn't recognize myself. I had become a shadow of myself. And then, one September afternoon, I finally had a small break. I managed to fully pay back the $3,000 to Mrs. Thompson. She received them with a smile and told me she was proud of me, that few people had my integrity and my strength. Her words made me cry again. It was sad that I needed to look to strangers for the recognition and support my own family never gave me. Besides, I had managed to save an additional $2,500. It wasn't much, but it was something. A small safety net, a light at the end of the tunnel that had been so dark for so long. For the first time in months, I slept a full night without nightmares about losing my house. But that peace lasted exactly 4 days. On Sunday afternoon, Ryan appeared at my house without warning. He came with Vanessa and Leo, whom I hadn't seen in almost a year. My grandson had grown so much I almost didn't recognize him. He was 5 years old now. He was a beautiful boy with his father's eyes and the smile I remembered from Ryan when he was little. My heart squeezed seeing him. I tried to hug him, but he hid behind Vanessa. He didn't even remember me well anymore. It had been so long since the last time I took care of him that to him I was practically a stranger. That hurt more than I want to admit. They had even taken away my relationship with my grandson. Ryan and Vanessa entered my house with a tense attitude that immediately put me on alert. It wasn't a social visit. Something was coming. Something bad. I offered them coffee, but they said no, that this wouldn't take much time. They sat in my living room and looked at me with an expression I couldn't fully decipher, but that filled me with deep fear. Ryan went straight to the point. He told me they had been analyzing their financial situation very carefully over the last few months, that things weren't working out as they had planned, that Vanessa had gotten a new job but earned less than before, that their monthly expenses were too high, that the payment for the $200,000 house plus the payment for the condo they were still finishing paying off was unsustainable. He explained all this with an almost professional tone, as if he were presenting a financial report at his work and not talking about how they had destroyed my life. I asked him where he was going with all this. Vanessa intervened with that sweet and manipulative voice I detested so much. She told me they had reached a solution that would be beneficial for everyone. They explained to me that they were going to sell their old condo. With the money from that sale, they could cover some small debts they had accumulated, but it wouldn't be enough to get current with the loan for the big house. They had already accumulated 5 overdue monthly payments there. $16,000, plus late interest that kept growing every day. The bank had already sent them the first foreclosure notice. In 3 months, if they didn't get current, they would start the legal process to take the house from them. And since the house was in my name too, that meant my credit history would be destroyed and my own house would come into risk because it was linked as secondary collateral. I asked him why they hadn't told me anything before. Why had they waited until the situation was so desperate? Ryan shrugged and said they had been trying to solve it alone, that they didn't want to worry me, that they thought they could handle it. The same excuses as always, the same lies. Then Vanessa dropped the bomb. She told me that the only viable solution they had found was for me to sell my house. That with the money from the sale, we could fully pay off the $16,000 overdue loan, bring the mortgage current, and I would have enough money left to rent a small apartment for a while I found something more permanent. I remained silent, processing what I had just heard. They wanted me to sell my house, the house I had saved by spending all my savings, the house where I had lived for more than 30 years, the house where Ryan grew up, the house that was the only thing I had left in this world. They wanted me to be left with nothing to save them from the consequences of their own irresponsible decisions. Ryan added that it wasn't just for them, that it was also for me, that if the bank executed the mortgage, I would lose my house anyway without getting any benefit, that at least if I sold it voluntarily, I could control the process and make sure to get a good price, that I was being practical, intelligent, that it was the only logical option we had. I told them no. It was a simple, short word, but it came out of my mouth with a firmness I didn't know I had. I told them I wasn't going to sell my house, that they had created this problem, and they would have to find a way to solve it, that I had already paid too much for their mistakes. Vanessa stood up furious. She shouted at me that I was being selfish, that it was my grandson who would suffer the consequences, that Leo would be left without a home because of me, that we would have to move to a horrible place, that his childhood would be marked by my refusal to help. She tried to manipulate me using the child, making me feel guilty for not sacrificing myself one more time. I replied with a trembling but firm voice that Leo was their responsibility, not mine, that they were his parents and should find a way to provide him a home, that I had already done my part raising Ryan, sacrificing myself for decades for him, and that now it was my turn to take care of what little I had left. Ryan approached me with a hard expression I had never seen on him. He told me that if I didn't sell my house voluntarily, the bank would execute it anyway when the loan went into total default, that I would lose it without getting any benefit, that I would end up on the street without a single cent, that at least if I cooperated now, I could save something. I told him I preferred to lose it like that than hand it over voluntarily to save them, that if the bank took it from me, at least it would be that I fought until the end for what was mine, that I wasn't going to be the one to sign the papers of my own destruction just so they could keep their luxury house they never should have bought. Vanessa laughed bitterly. She told me I was a stubborn and selfish old woman, that she had always known I was like that I only thought about myself, that I had never really loved Ryan because a mother who loved her son would do anything to help him. Her words were like knives, designed to hurt me deeply. But something inside me had broken permanently during these months of suffering. Her insults didn't reach me anymore. I didn't care what she thought of me anymore. I didn't need her approval or Ryan's. For the first time in my life, I was going to choose myself. I asked Ryan to look around my house. I reminded him that when he gave me his opinion about spending $30,000 to fix this roof that was literally falling down, he told me it was very risky, that I should be prudent with my money, that it wasn't sensible to make that investment. Those had been his exact words. But months later, he took $200,000 in my name, without asking me, without warning me, without my real consent, to buy a luxury house for Vanessa. $200,000 versus $30,000. A house of caprice versus repairs for survival. And now, when his irresponsible decisions had led them to disaster, they wanted me to pay the price. Ryan tried to interrupt me, but I didn't let him. I continued speaking, saying all the truths I had kept for decades. I reminded him of every sacrifice I had made for him, every meal I skipped so he could eat better, every night I worked until my whole body ached to pay for his education, every time I gave up my own dreams so he could fulfill his. I told him that when his father died, I could have given up. I could have put Ryan with some relative and sought my own life, but I didn't do it. I worked double, triple, destroying my health so he would have everything he needed, so he could graduate from college with honors, so he could have the life I never had. And what had been my reward? A son who saw me as a resource to exploit, a daughter-in-law who treated me like a maid, a grandson who didn't even remember me because they had removed me from his life, a debt of $200,000 that I never authorized, the constant threat of losing the only thing I had left. Vanessa tried to speak, but I silenced her with a gesture of my hand. I told her she had no right to have an opinion on my relationship with my son, that she had arrived in our lives when Ryan was already a grown man, when all the hard work was already finished, that it was easy to judge me from her position of privilege, having grown up with parents who gave her everything without her having to sacrifice anything. I explained to her that I wasn't selfish for refusing to sell my house, that they were selfish for asking me, selfish for having taken a loan in my name without my permission, selfish for having put my future at risk for their whims, selfish for appearing now, demanding that I solve their problems when they had never been there to solve mine. Ryan finally exploded. He shouted at me that he never asked me for all those sacrifices, that if I had chosen to live a miserable life, that had been my decision, that he didn't have to spend his life paying for choices I made freely, that it was time I stopped using my past as an emotional weapon against him. His words confirmed what I already knew deep down. My son not only didn't value me, but he blamed me for having loved him too much. He blamed me for having worked so hard for him. He blamed me for reminding him of everything I had done, as if my sacrifice were a burden to him instead of an act of love. I told him with a calm voice, surprisingly calm, that he was right about something, that I had made those decisions freely, and now I was making another decision freely, the decision to tell him no, the decision to protect myself for the first time in my life, the decision not to continue being the one who always sacrificed herself so others could shine. I asked them to leave my house. Ryan looked at me with a mixture of rage and disbelief, as if he couldn't believe that I was daring to stand up to him. Vanessa took Leo by the hand and left my house making a scene, saying horrible things about me that the child heard all confused. Ryan stayed a moment longer at the door. He told me this wouldn't end here, that when the bank executed the loan and took my house, not to come looking for him asking for help, that he wasn't going to rescue me, that I had made my decision, and now I would have to live with the consequences. I replied that I was perfectly willing to live with the consequences of my own decisions, something he clearly didn't know how to do. When they left, I sat in my living room and cried for hours, not out of regret, but out of relief, out of liberation, for the feeling of having defended myself for the first time. The tears were painful, but also cathartic. I was mourning the end of a relationship that probably had never been what I thought it was. The following days were difficult. Guilt tried to invade me constantly. I wondered if I had done the right thing, if I should have helped them one more time, if I was really being selfish, as they said. But every time those thoughts arrived, I reminded myself that I hadn't created this problem, that I had been the victim, not the villain. 3 weeks later, I received a call from Ryan. His voice sounded defeated. He informed me that they had lost the house, that the bank had foreclosed on the mortgage, that they were moving back to the old condo which they still hadn't finished paying off. He waited a moment, probably expecting me to say something, to offer to help, to feel guilty. I asked him if that meant the loan that was in my name had been canceled with the foreclosure of the property. There was a long silence. Finally, he admitted yes, that by losing the house, which was the primary collateral of the loan, the debt had been settled with the property, that my house was no longer at risk, that I was free from that obligation. I felt a gigantic weight lift from my shoulders. I had resisted. I had said no, and I had survived. My house was safe. My future was secured as much as possible. I had paid a very high emotional price, but I had come out ahead. I told Ryan that I was sorry things had ended like this, that I hoped this experience would teach him something about responsibility and about the consequences of his actions, that my door would always be open if he wanted a genuine relationship based on mutual respect, but that I would never again allow them to use or manipulate me. He hung up without saying anything else. I haven't heard from him since then. It's been 6 months now. Sometimes I wonder how Leo is, if he thinks of me, if they have told him some distorted version of what happened. I miss my grandson with all my heart, but I understand that is the price I had to pay for choosing myself. Now I live peacefully in my house with the safe roof over my head. I continue working, cleaning 2 houses a week, only the ones my body can handle. Mrs. Thompson and Mrs. Davis have become something like friends. They listen to me, value me, treat me with the dignity my own family never gave me. I have learned something fundamental in these last few years. That saying no doesn't make you selfish. That setting boundaries doesn't make you a bad person. That protecting yourself doesn't make you a villain. I spent decades believing that my value depended on how much I could sacrifice for others, on how much I could endure without complaining, on how much I could give without receiving anything in return. Now I understand that true love doesn't demand that you destroy yourself for others. That a healthy relationship, even between mother and son, must have reciprocity and respect. That you cannot save people who don't want to assume responsibility for their own lives. And that sometimes, the only way to survive is to let go of those who are dragging you down. My story is not unique. I know there are many women like me, especially from my generation, who spent their entire lives giving everything for their families only to be discarded when they were no longer useful. Women who were trained since they were girls to be self-sacrificing, quiet, invisible. Women who never learned that they also deserved love, care, consideration. If anyone reading or listening to this identifies with my story, I want to tell you something important. It is never too late to defend yourself. It is never too late to say no. It is never too late to choose yourself. It can be painful. It can mean losing relationships you thought were important. But in the end, the only person who will be with you until your last day is yourself, and you deserve to treat yourself with the love and respect you have given to others for so long. I, Margaret Sullivan, at 62 years old, finally learned my worth. And no one, not even my own son, is going to take it away from me again.